Welcome to Crawlspace. I'm Tim here today with Lance and Jen. What's up?
Going pretty well. I'm excited to introduce this new show to our audience.
I'm excited because it's Tim's birthday today.
Oh, yeah.
Well, not... I guess...
Birthday, Tim.
Okay, thank you. I'll accept this. Thank you.
But not when people are listening. The day
true.
of our recording is Tim's birthday. So
Right.
this is our birthday gift to him. A feed drop of Invisible Tears, Episode 3. Happy birthday.
Thank you very much, Lance.
And happy birthday to anybody whose birthday is today. This is also your gift as well.
And Invisible Tears is a great new podcast, and we are happy to be affiliated with it. We've been working with Jane and Amanda and Drew, and you can follow Invisible Tears on Instagram at Invisible Tears Podcast. They're also on TikTok. I think they have a Facebook presence as well.
And we have invited you, Jen, for this intro because you have been directly working with Jane and Amanda and Drew on Jane's story that is being told in Dark Valley. So having you come on to explain Invisible Tears and Dark Valley, the difference between the two, would be super useful as we prepare for the premiere of Dark Valley in the spring of next year.
Yeah, that's a great question. It's a little strange that we have two podcasts under the Crawlspace kind of banner coming out about the same subject. I think with Invisible Tears, Jane's podcast, I think it's a really important show because she gets to talk about topics that are very near and dear to her. She gets to have ownership over her own story. And of course, Jane is known as the only survivor of the Connecticut River Valley serial killer. She's got an incredible story. And we want to give you episode 3, which is kind of an overview of the other victims for the Connecticut River Valley killer. Jane, Amanda, and Drew go through it pretty succinctly. They give you like the broad strokes of the story. And it's personal to Jane too, because she feels connected to all of these other victims as well. I think where the difference comes in with our show that's coming out in the spring is that it's a little bit more in depth. Well, a lot more in depth. It's an investigatory podcast. So Jane and I have been working together on that show. We've spent probably a little over a year and a half discussing it and doing research and talking and building a relationship. And I'm very, very excited to share that show in the spring, but equally as excited to send you all to Invisible Tears to listen to Jane talk about topics from PTSD to bullying in schools to other victims of crimes. It's a great listen.
I love the fact that this started off with us wanting to do a series about the Connecticut River Valley murders that happened in the late 70s to late 80s. And it really blossomed into this larger project with Jane doing Invisible Tears and concurrently running Dark Valley. I don't think any other investigative true crime podcast has done something like that, where you have one of the attack victims going into what it's like post-attack, going into how she survived, went through PTSD, all of her trials and tribulations, and how she came out on the other side a much stronger person, and still working with you on the investigative part. Yeah, it wasn't totally intentional, but once we saw the potential there for something bigger, for the total story to be told, I think that's remarkable.
They definitely function as sister shows. I hope people listen to both shows because I think you'll get something similar in the same universe and then two different products at the same time. And I like what you said, Lance, about her talking about the aftermath, like after she experienced this crazy attempted murder. It's often left out of the discussion in true crime, right? We focus on maybe a little bit before the crime itself, and maybe the investigation after, but we don't really check in with these victims to see how they process this. Sometimes it takes 5, 10, 20 years to go through this. Some people don't get help. Some people are stuck in their own trauma. And that's exactly what Jane's discussing on her show.
Yeah, it's fantastic. And you can learn more at invisible-tears.com. And the episode that we're about to play is episode 3 from Invisible Tears. It's called CT River Valley Cases Overview, and they discuss several of the cases that have been grouped together to be known as the Connecticut River Valley murders.
And if you haven't subscribed to Invisible Tears, go ahead and subscribe to that show wherever you subscribe to your shows, wherever you listen to your podcasts, and also swing on over to the Dark Valley podcast feed. There's a trailer there. Subscribe to that, and then stay tuned for material that'll be coming your way as we get closer to the premiere date in the spring of 2023.
My name is Jane Boroski, host of Invisible Tears. This podcast will be about my story in my words, talking about my own personal experiences in self-healing. I do not claim to be a therapist, counselor, or licensed psychologist.
Hello, my name is Amanda Bedard, and I'm the co-host, producer, and editor of Invisible Tears. I'm a Reiki master, certified professional life coach, spiritual coach, wellness coach, and a counseling practitioner. Some of the content you will hear in this podcast may be disturbing to some. Viewer discretion is advised. But it is our hope by putting this information out there that we may help others to heal. We will always be a platform for truth and healing. This is Invisible Tears.
I'm Jane Boroski, and I'm here with my co-host Amanda and her husband Drew. And today we want to talk about the Connecticut River Valley cases, or the murders that happened in the from 1978 to 1988. Amongst those, there were 8 women, and there was one survivor, which was me. Myself and my daughter that I was pregnant with. Let's talk a little bit about how it got its name. Mm-hmm. So the Connecticut River Valley murders started in 78. Most of them were the rest of them were in the 80s. Mm-hmm. The murders and the sites where their bodies were found were along the 91 corridor between New Hampshire and Vermont.
Yep, which is called the Connecticut River Valley.
Yeah, and most of the bodies that were found are definitely within the corridor of 91. Mm-hmm. They're not too far off of an exit, whether they're in Claremont, here in Swansea.
Saxon's River. And even there was one victim, Elizabeth Critchley. She disappeared very close to off of 91. She was hitchhiking. So we can briefly talk about each victim, when they went missing, and when their bodies were found.
Yep.
Amanda, if you want to start.
Yeah, of course. So the first known is Kathy Milligan. Kathy Milligan was found stabbed to death in the Chandler Brook wetlands up in New London in October of 1978, and she was 26 years old. Yeah, and so Kathy wasn't actually connected to the Connecticut River Valley cases until after the fact, actually until quite a few years later. And I believe that she was connected based off of her age, demographic, where she was found, and also the stab pattern.
And then in July of 81, Elizabeth Critchley went missing. She was hitchhiking to Vermont. She was 37 years old, and her body was found in August of 88. She was believed to be stabbed to death.
In August of 81.
Or August of 81, I'm sorry.
No worries.
And she was stabbed to death.
Yep, she was found in Unity, right?
Yeah,
Yes.
and she was last seen in Framingham, Mass.
Yes.
Yep.
And then there was Bernice Quartermash. She was 16. She disappeared in May of 84. She was last seen at a residence in Claremont. And her body was found in April of 86. Yep. And because her body was decomposed, they did forensics, found that she was stabbed to death.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And Bernice was found on Cat Hole Hill Road in Newport.
Now, her age, being 16, is the outlier among the other victims, but by all accounts, she looked and held herself like she was in her 20s. So that sort of falls into line with the rest of the women involved in this case as being looking, or at least appearing, in their 20s, early 30s.
Or I would even probably say too, some of the women that were in their 30s probably looked a little bit younger. So based off of some of the pictures that I've seen too. So technically all the women that were connected to the Connecticut River Valley serial killer, the ages range from 16 to 37. But it seems like there's a little bit more of a similarity of them appearing as if they're in their 20s, I would say.
I also think that had a lot to do with victim of opportunity, too.
Exactly. Yep.
They were all alone. Most of them were hitchhiking
Yep. I was going
to
to
a
say
destination.
hitchhiking alone in some sort of, somewhat, not completely isolated area, but like you said, Jane, victim of opportunity presented itself.
And then we got Ellen Freed. She was at a payphone at approximately 2 o'clock in the morning. She was a nurse, and she had just gotten off her shift. And she was talking to her sister on the payphone. And she went missing in July of 84. And her body was found September of 85. And forensics had shown that she was stabbed to death.
Yep.
And she was 26.
Yep. She was found along the Sugar River in Newport. Yes. Yep. And then next we have Eva Morris, who disappeared July of 1985. She was 27 years old. She disappeared while hitchhiking. Hitchhiking home from work. Am I correct?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. All right.
Yep.
Along Route 12. Route 12 in the Walpole,
She
Charleston
was
area.
just out of Walpole, walking into Charlestown.
Yep. And she was found April of 86, actually April 25th of 1986 in Unity. New
Now,
Hampshire.
her body was found 500 feet from where Elizabeth Critchley was found.
Right.
And it's interesting because they were actually found, what were they found, 5 years apart?
Yeah, they were found 5 years apart. So Critchley was found August 9th in 81, and then Eva Morris was found April 25th of 86. So being found, the dump sites essentially being, 500 feet apart, that's telling.
Yep, that's when the New Hampshire State Police really realized that there was something going on in the area, and that's when they started the task force to look at all these cases.
Yep.
Yep. It was actually within weeks. There was within a week or 10 days.
Yeah, within 10 days,
They
3 bodies were
found
found.
Eva's body, Bernice's body, and then the next one that we were going to talk about was Linda Moore. Linda Moore was killed in her own home. She was stabbed to death in April of 86, and that's when her body was found that day. Mm-hmm. So from April 15th to April 25th, there were 3 bodies found, and they immediately started a task force.
Yeah.
And it was between New Hampshire and Vermont.
Mm-hmm.
Both states worked together with this task force. Of what we have heard, Maine didn't want anything to do with it, which Maine was having a very serious problem up there with homicides also.
Right. Yeah, and for those that are or aren't familiar with the Connecticut River Valley, so the Connecticut River Valley really essentially runs along that 91 corridor, but it really spans both Vermont and New Hampshire. So Linda's home was actually in Saxton's River, Vermont. So we have the different sites spanning between New Hampshire and Vermont, but the common similarity is really like that 91 corridor that sort of breaks up the...
Now, Linda Moore is the only one that was found being attacked in her home.
Yes.
Not
Correct.
alone, but she was alone at her home. I believe she was kind of sunbathing and doing laundry at the time, like hanging clothes out to dry, and was attacked. And her husband was the one who found her. Was about 2 hours after they believe the attack happened, and he wasn't gone from the house all that long. So the window for that opportunity kind of raises a lot of questions as to, was somebody scoping it out? Did they just happen to drive by and see her?
Right.
Right. And I mean, even though her attack happened in her house and she was found in her house, I can't help but discard that maybe, I mean, she put up a heck of a fight. They said that there was just blood everywhere. She fought like heck. Now, I can't disregard the fact that maybe he tried to take her
Right.
and she resisted.
Right.
Because then you come to Barbara Agnew.
Mm-hmm.
Barbara Agnew went missing January of '87. She was just coming back from a ski trip.
Yep.
She was 36, single mom, and her car was found in a rest area off of 91.
Yep. Off of I-91 North, the White River Junction rest area.
And her vehicle it was obvious there was quite the struggle, and she was attacked initially in her vehicle.
Right.
Because there was blood and everything around.
Mm-hmm.
But then she disappeared, and her body wasn't found until March of '87, and with obvious stab wounds. She was obviously stabbed to death.
And her story is a little interesting because she was on her way home from a ski trip. It was snowing that night.
Major snowstorm.
And she had pulled off to the rest area when she was only about 15 miles from her home.
Even closer, I think.
Yeah,
it
I think
was.
she was closer than that.
Like 11 miles, something like that.
Something
Yeah.
very
So
close.
that brings up to the question is, did somebody force her to stop at the rest area? Did she see somebody in distress, being a nurse and wanting to just stop and help out, just being her, that being herself?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Why did she stop at that rest area during a major snowstorm, and
that close
and
to
being
home.
so close to home? Yeah, that's a
I think that's definitely been one of the biggest questions surrounding Barbara was why? Why would she be stopped there?
yeah, exactly.
And we'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsors.
Thanks to our sponsors, and now we're back to the program.
And in a future episode, we will be talking about a gentleman that gave a deathbed confession to her murder. However, there's a lot of questions involved with that, and police at the time didn't put a lot of weight into his statement. But it does bring to light, the possibilities. Was this truly a one-off? Was this guy making up the story? Or if it was true, then what else does that mean? Because by all accounts, every other attack seems like it was a one-person attack. But this
Exactly.
deathbed confession spoke of 3 assailants that attacked and abducted her.
Yep.
And she was found in Heartland, Vermont when she was found in March of '87.
And then there comes me.
And then there comes Jane.
In August of '88, I had pulled over. I had pulled into a closed store to get a soda out of a soda machine. It was about just before midnight. And I was attacked and stabbed 27 times by this, what most believe is the serial killer. I survived. My baby survived, thankfully. I was 7 months pregnant. And I guess the stab wound pattern and the stab wounds and the size of the stab wounds is how they kind of connected me into the Connecticut River Valley cases.
Yep.
And the fact that I was a victim of opportunity.
Right.
It was late at night. The store was closed. There was nobody else around.
The lighting in the parking lot was weird too. I
Yeah,
remember
the
Philip saying
lighting in the
that.
parking lot was really weird.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So it's, I guess that's how they connected me into the cases.
Mm-hmm.
And after my case, he seemed to stop.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we don't know if he stopped.
I was going to say, Jane, what do you think? Do you think that he stopped?
I have read up, so, it's weird because I was only 22 when I was attacked. And I didn't really focus on the bad in the world. I was 22. I was pregnant. I was, living a 22-year-old life. I did my partying. I carefree, didn't watch the news all the time. And don't forget, there was no internet back then either.
Right.
So, to really, it was weird for me to really start focusing and really looking into serial killers.
Right.
And I've done a ton of research on serial killers, mostly online, talking to some people that have an enormous amount of experience with serial killers. They've interviewed them, they've talked to them, and I've asked several questions about different things with serial killers. And one thing I know, one common thing is they don't just stop.
Right.
They don't just stop and disappear. They just don't stop.
They're forced to stop in some way.
Exactly.
Right. Yeah.
They either are incarcerated,
Right.
or they move to another
Another area. And possibly do the same thing, although because of the different area, it's not connected.
Yeah. And or they're dead.
I was just going to say, or they're dead.
So there's a lot of questions raised on why was I the last victim, and why there haven't been any more. I'm thankful that there hadn't been any more in the area.
Absolutely.
I think that bothered me a lot, that with the information that I gave them, these are still unsolved. My case is still unsolved. So one of my biggest fears was because he wasn't identified and caught and arrested, he was gonna continue to kill.
Right.
And but we haven't heard of any more cases that are connected that we know of.
Yep.
In more of our discussions, we're going to talk about more cases that we kind of think could be connected to the Connecticut River Valley cases. I know I have a couple in my mind.
Yep.
For whatever reason, they haven't put them on the list of Connecticut River Valley victims.
I think Drew has an opinion about why he stopped after you. I like your opinion about it.
Being a man who was out there killing and stabbing women, how emasculating it had to have been to the fact that he couldn't finish the job with a 22-year-old who was 7 months pregnant, who lived and survived, and the baby survived. Jessica survived. How emasculating that had to have been.
Right. Right. I think it's, whether that's the case or not, I think it's a great point.
It's one of those going, okay, if I can't finish the job here, what demographics do I have to change in order to actually fulfill that need to kill?
Mm-hmm.
And does that maybe tie into the elderly couples up in Maine? Because when talking with locals, especially in a little bit north of here, in the Claremont area, locals do believe that it's not just north and south killings, but there is some east and west killings going from Vermont over to Maine, hitting
Right.
up more central and the seaboard of New Hampshire.
Yeah. Throughout this process, I've definitely, I know that both of you guys have done it too. I've definitely hopped on to the different websites for the different cold cases and missing people. And all I can say is that if you guys haven't done that, you should, just to sort of educate yourselves, not to scare yourselves, but just to sort of educate yourselves. There are quite a bit of unsolved missing and cold cases just in the New England area alone. So throughout this process, I've scoured some of those cases, and it gives me an uneasy feeling. But this broad overview is definitely what's been connected to the Connecticut River Valley, serial cases. Like we said, we in further episodes, and as we start diving a little bit deeper, we very well may have an opinion about what should be, maybe what cases should be discounted, and or that they're a little bit too far of an outlier, and what cases we're sort of confused about haven't been included into the timeline. But Jane, what you said about how you were connected with the actual stab and the size of the stab patterns. So one thing that we called out when we were looking at all these cases too was that in all of these cases, the throats of the women were cut, and there were 20 plus stab wounds about the abdomen and the neck area. And quite often there was some sort of V pattern. I just wanted to make sure and call that out. That's a very specific, that's a very specific stab pattern.
Absolutely, it is.
Yeah.
And on me, with my attack, I was he also sliced my neck and
Right.
cut my jugular. So,
Yeah.
and very well, that could be why Linda Moore is connected, because
Right.
you can't really. They don't have a whole lot of information about, specific stabs or stab wounds or anything like that with her. Just that she was stabbed to death.
Yep.
So, maybe the authorities know more than what they've put out to connect her
Right.
with the cases.
Yeah, I mean, obviously we don't actually have like case files or anything like that in
Not
front
yet.
of us.
No.
Not
Not
yet.
yet.
Not yet.
We're gonna work on that.
Hashtag goals. Yes.
Yeah.
We will try to get as much as we can. We would love to actually see that information.
Yep. So the authorities used the stab wound, stab patterns, and along with where the bodies were found. Linda Moore is the only one that was found in her home. The rest were actually found in remote wooded areas. Many were actually along the Sugar River, which is an offshoot of the Connecticut River.
Yeah, we figured that out. Yeah.
So that the proximity of where the bodies were found and the stab pattern is where authorities kind of started to connect all these different cases. Now, as far as the abductions areas, they're not in proximity.
No.
I would not say that they're in proximity.
Correct.
Now, once again, if you do look at the Connecticut River Valley, how big of an area can that be? Well, it does run from northern Vermont, New Hampshire, all the way down to Connecticut, right through Massachusetts. It goes through Springfield, which, once again, there's a lot of stuff happened in Springfield, Mass, that I don't think have been tied.
Yeah.
Now,
Right.
there does tend to be more along it's male victims in the Springfield area, but it's still a lot of bodies being found in and around the Connecticut River.
Yeah.
Connecticut River.
And I mean, even if you go on the cold case sites or the missing persons, there's a lot of missing persons along the Connecticut River Valley too, where their bodies haven't been found
Right.
or their remains haven't been found. So, I mean, it would not surprise me if there were more victims that just have never been found.
Yep.
Yeah. As I've tuned in and with my gut, I understand why this is the complete picture that we have and why all of these cases have been connected, but I don't think that it's a full scope by any means. I think that there are more.
As far as bodies not being found, where we live, we know that the power plant and the dam can chew up some bodies. So if anybody's dropped, north of Brattleboro, the bodies have to carry downriver through the power plant and the dam there, which every now and then a body will actually make its way through, and it's found down in Massachusetts. But there are times when nobody resurfaces.
Yeah, that's good. While morbid,
But
that's a good point.
One of his
That's why the sturgeon are so big down there. They're just feeding on bodies.
Oh God, that's horrifying.
That's why I don't swim in the Connecticut River. But we should add though that we've never seen him throw the bodies into the river. The bodies have not been found in the river or off the river or anywhere in that vicinity.
Right.
It's always mostly been in a wooded area.
Yep, in a wooded area most often that's somewhat near a river, but you are correct. Never use the river as like a forensic countermeasure or anything like that.
Like the Sugar River is almost like a stream.
True.
It's very, very small.
Yeah, it's very, very small.
It's
in
long.
places. Oh, yeah.
Very long, but it's not very wide at all.
Yep.
And we found that Sugar River by a lot of the sites where the bodies were found. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is, I'm surprised that's never been really anywhere on the internet or anything.
Yeah. When we were just really looking at the cases and actually looking at looking at some of the sites where the bodies were found, and essentially just looking at maps and all of a sudden realizing
Sugar River was
Sugar
there.
River, Critchley, Quartermarsh, Freed, and Morse were all found right along Sugar River.
And although the bodies were found in a wooded area, it's not like there was any extra effort to dispose of the bodies, especially with the rivers being right there. They weren't buried. They were just kind of laid out. So was there revisiting that was happening, or what was the cause or the reasoning behind that? And that's where Jane's case gets brought up as to, well, hers is more in line with the Linda Moore attack because he didn't try to abduct her. But I actually think he probably did try to abduct her.
Yeah.
But I think that car driving by during the middle of the attack spooked the hell out of him and was more of a, I got to get the hell out of here. The job is done.
Yeah.
I think that it was.
He
I
did
think that
try to take me.
Right, because that was his and first initial, confrontation with you was to really like confuse and to take you, to confuse and take you. I think a lot of it was her fight. You fought like hell.
Oh, I did.
You broke your freaking windshield with your foot. You fought. There was, and you've said before, that you just knew, like, he wanted to take you, and you knew that there was no way that you were going with him because you would not survive that. So,
and that's why Barbara Agnew is so similar to mine, because she fought like hell not to go with him.
Yeah.
There was so much evidence there that she fought for her life not to go with him, and ultimately he ended up taking her.
And we'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsors.
Thanks to our sponsors, and now we're back to the program.
And that's why I say you kind of wonder about Linda Moore.
Yeah.
Did he try to take her? And she just fought for her life and fought really hard, and
right. We don't know.
We don't know.
Yeah. That's interesting too that you brought up the revisiting. I think that's nothing that actually ever popped into my mind, but I mean, you are right with the way that the bodies were found. They weren't tried, they weren't buried. He didn't try to use the water as a forensic countermeasure, even though most of them were right by water.
there.
Was there revisiting? We know from going to some of the places where these women were found that there's no way that someone would just come upon these areas. It's quite clear that he would have to have some sort of knowledge or prior history of knowing the lay of the land, whether it's whether he's a hunter or something like that. They're extremely remote areas.
Yeah, very. I think all of them are on dirt roads.
Right.
And
Dirt roads today.
Oh, right. And dirt roads today. Right. We have to remember that this was happening back in the 80s, too.
Yeah.
yeah, so they're still dirt roads. So even in the 80s, it was extremely remote.
Right.
We noticed a few new houses that were built along that road where Eva and Elizabeth were found.
Yep.
So it was extremely remote.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I don't think anybody's ever brought up the revisiting, but I actually think that's a really good point. Who knows?
And we always thought, too, is that he was very familiar with the area.
Mm-hmm.
I feel it's obvious to me that he knew where he was going to bring them to kill them.
Yep.
That was pre-planned. That was absolutely pre-planned for him.
Yep.
He knew where he was going.
Yeah. Yep, I agree.
So we wanted to just give an overview to the listeners that don't know what the Connecticut River Valley serial cases are, because we will be talking about each and every one of them throughout this podcast, and we are going to dedicate an episode to each victim, talking more in depth about where and when they were taking, like even more in depth than what we just did with this quick overview. Try to talk to some of the family members to find out, what was that woman like at that time? What was her mind frame? What would have caused her to actually get into the vehicle of somebody? Mm-hmm. Now, once again, back in the 70s and 80s, hitchhiking was a completely different, you had a different outlook on hitchhiking than you do now.
It was commonplace back then. I mean, even all through the 80s, it was pretty commonplace.
I can't remember the last time I saw a hitchhiker.
Mm-hmm.
Nowadays.
I know. Yeah, nowadays.
Yeah.
Oh,
Uber.
Yeah. And I think it's important to speak to what Drew was just talking about with more dedicated episodes to each and every one of these women, and trying to speak with family members or people that were impacted, by what happened to them, because we want to make sure that everybody understands and gets to know these women in life and their legacy and what they were like. They are not just a statistic.
Yeah, exactly.
They are not just a bullet point. We think that it's really important for people to remember them, and understand what they were like in life, because just because their lives ended, unfortunately and tragically like this, that is not what distinguishes them.
Exactly. I don't want them to be forgotten.
Ever.
And, I mean, a lot of these cases are 30, almost 40 years old, and they're unsolved.
Yeah.
These cases are unsolved. Nobody has ever been arrested or charged for these murders.
Yeah.
So I really, this was one of the reasons why I really wanted to do this podcast. And I was lucky enough to find two wonderful co-hosts to do this podcast with me. I don't want these women to be forgotten.
Yeah.
They deserve more than that.
Absolutely.
And I just don't want them to be forgotten.
Yeah, and we don't either.
In the future episodes, we will be talking about the suspects that are involved in this case, or how they came about to be suspects, and whether we put some weight into those suspects or discount them completely. It'll be interesting because I do believe that we'll be rewriting the history of this case with who people think is the attacker. Right now, when you look up the Connecticut River Valley serial killer, you see one name. We're going to make sure that that name is never brought up again.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah,
Perfectly worded.
perfectly worded. Thank you, Drew.
Thank you all so much for listening to this episode of Invisible Tears. Make sure you subscribe to our podcast, hear all future episodes. Follow us on Facebook and Instagram. We also have a website, invisible-tears.com, where you can keep current with any events that may be happening with our podcast, read more about Jane and the team, and read more about all the Connecticut River Valley unsolved cases.
If you are looking for everyday items, clothes, collectibles, or a gift for that special someone, you can support us further by checking out our retail store, The Frugal Marketplace. We can be found at thefrugalmarketplace.com or search for us on eBay and Poshmark. We hold an online claim sale on Facebook Live every Monday night at 7 p.m. where you can find our latest items for sales or items at a deep discount. If you're local to the area, please stop in and say hi. You can find us at 919 West Swansea Road in Swansea, New Hampshire. The links for our products can be found in our show notes.
If you want to learn more about my wellness practice, Guided Path Wellness, head to guidedpathwellness.org. There you can read more about me and my certifications, more about the Reiki and coaching services I offer both in person and remote, and read all about my products for sale that I make through the practice. Feel free to utilize the Contact Us section on the website with any questions, or utilize that free 15-minute consultation booking button if you have any questions about what might work for you. Evil may exist in this world, but we will not let it win. See you next episode.